Hey, good evening, everyone. Another Tuesday evening. I trust everybody is well and I've kept relatively warm given the temperature. I should be getting ready to go live on Facebook, however that works these days. Still none the wiser how things are. But anyway, good to be around. Let's have a look. Yeah, there's something I've just put on the brilliant. Okay, so it's Tuesday night on the 13th of August. I trust everybody's well. My name is Delroy Hall. We are still looking at moral injury. This thing is just gathering momentum, really, and it's got my interest. It really has. It's got other people's interest as well. And there's a correction I'll be making from my newsletter. I've been in kind of written conversation with somebody yesterday. From the States, and I'll just say a little bit more about that. But today we're looking at, can you spot the signs if you're experiencing moral injury? Good evening, Sonia. I'm not too sure who's happening out on, anyway, I put something out on Facebook, so you might be able to see it. And, oh, yep, there's also my sound engineer. Just let me know if you manage to get on Facebook. Just let me know if it's up and working. It should be. So let me just get this going here. So tonight we'll be looking at moral injury. Is this happening to me? Self-protection, and we're going to be kind of wrapping up. Oh, yes. Good evening, Doc on LinkedIn. Really good to see you this evening. So my name is Delroy Hall, trained psychotherapist over 30 years, and a teacher and lecturer. And I've been doing these sessions now for just over 4.5 years. And it's only now, the last 6 months, I've really kind of gained traction and kind of got my thing, it seems. I said to folks, I'm not too sure whether moral injury has found me or how I found it. But anyway, we're working together, hopefully helping a lot of people, not just in the UK, but in different parts of the world as well. So first off, I'll just stick on YouTube and LinkedIn what moral injury is. You should, yes, workplace moral injury, which is really what I'm concerned about, is a response to witnessing or participating in behaviours that contradicts one's morals or beliefs. And other, here we go. There's some stuff that's happening in America, actually. It's quite interesting to see what might be happening. Here we go. Moral injury is likely one of the key causes of the Great Resignation or the Great Disillusionment. So let me just put that there as well on Facebook, just in case you can see it. Okay, so, okay, it says, I'm dismissing that. Might be some problems according to the having problems connecting. Please check your internet connection. I'm not too sure what's happening here. Oh gosh, this is getting from bad to worse. I'm going to press on anyway. If you're able to hear me loud and clear, just let me know that you are. But he said he's just got some problems connecting, so I'm not too sure what that means. This is not brilliant, but anyway, I'm going to press on. And if the recording is no good, I'll delete it live and I'll do the recording and I'll post it up at another time. I can certainly do that. So we're looking at moral injury, looking at some of the definitions. We understand in the workplace it's when, thank you, brilliant. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you. That's really appreciative. Really appreciative. Okay, so how can you tell whether moral injury is happening to you or not? You know, sometimes we know that something is happening to us, but we just can't quite. Yeah, thank you, Sonia. I think that happened last week. I can see my picture really, really clear. And then when I was watching it again, it was very fuzzy. And then my friend from another part of Britain sent me the picture. It was very, very clear. So I really don't know what's going on. Maybe I need to update my equipment or get some technical expert advice on what's taking place. Anyway, let's press on. If it doesn't get any better, please keep me informed. And if it really ruins the broadcast this evening, all I'll just delete it and then I'll do it separately and then I'll send it on and I'll let you know. So sometimes we know that something is happening to us but we can't quite put our finger on it. So I've given you a couple of definitions. And one of the things I've said is that the awareness might not be instant, but over time, there's a growing sense of something isn't right here. We see something, we see unprofessional behavior, it's unethical. We kind of let it slide. but then we keep seeing it, and then at some point we say to ourselves, something isn't quite right here. And so what happened is we see something with our eyes, but then the experience is felt in our bodies. And when there's a physiological response, I say to folks, the physiological response is saying to you, something isn't quite right and it needs your attention, either attention in terms of ourselves, or we need to do something about what's taking place. So there's a physiological response. It's a measurable reaction. It's to do with the skin of the human body. It's a change of heart rate. And then what happens when we experience something and we're uncomfortable, or we experience something and it's not quite right, there's a change in our skin. There's minute changes, and what they do, they test. Sometimes what they can do, they can put 2 electrodes on the skin, and then they test the electrical current between the 2 electrodes. That is called the galvanic skin response. There's a change in the electrical properties of the skin when we witness something what we know is clearly wrong. So it's amazing, isn't it? This all happens instantaneously. We don't think about it, but at a very deep level within us, we know that something isn't quite right. And one of the things that's really become very apparent to me, if you are on Facebook, just send me a little note to say that you can hear me. If not, no worries. What's become really apparent as I've listened to individuals, not just in the UK, but Ireland, different parts of the world, is that people said, you know what, Delroy, I knew something was happening to me, but I didn't know there was a language for it. And it's over the weeks and months where I've been talking about moral injury, they say, that's what's been happening to me. And they realized that this thing, they weren't imagining it, it was something that was real and happening to them. Now, what some people did before it got worse, sometimes, people can see what's ahead. And quite often, if things start to gain momentum, I always say to folks, when things gain momentum, very rare does it just stop. It escalates. And what some people do, they don't like what's being done. They don't like what they're experiencing. Sometimes they can't put their finger on it. They recognize that's in the culture, and what they do before things get worse, people leave an organization just to preserve their lives. So how can we spot the signs? So here's my kind of correction. I made a comment in the newsletter, which came out late yesterday. I normally like the newsletter out a little bit earlier. That I made a comment that in America, I felt that they were more advanced where moral injury was concerned, more so than the UK. Well, somebody contacted me after reading my newsletter, came back to me in a very professional way, so it wasn't rude or anything like that, but he says, as far as he was concerned, he didn't see it. And we had a brief exchange on LinkedIn, and basically lots of organizations, like here, it's profit over people, and HR quite often is not, I don't want to use the word cahoots, but they're working together with management, not for your protection, but for the protection of the company or the organization. Now, I've worked for organizations, and it always baffled me when things happened and you had a duty to report it to HR, it would take forever to be resolved. And I could never understand what was going on, because I always thought that HR was for the benefit of the people. But and I guess technically, theoretically, it should be. But as I'm getting a bit older and wiser and hearing people's stories and their interaction with HR, what I'm clearly hearing and seeing and reading, that HR quite often, they work in, oh gosh, I don't want to say even collusion, but they work in cahoots with management to protect the organization or the company. Remember, I may have said to you before that self-care is not the responsibility of the organization. It is your responsibility, nobody else's. So this whole thing around, it's really important that you look after yourself. That's really, really key. So there's a quote here from Canopy. Is a government funding organization in Wales that has been developed to offer mental health support and care for social care staff and for NHS staff as well. And this is what they said, because during the pandemic, it was this time when moral injury really seemed to kind of surface. So basically for medical people, paramedics, doctors, nurses, the moral injury was you signed up to take care of people, to look after people. But during the pandemic, they were sending people home who were clearly unwell and needed treatment, but they sent people home because they didn't have the beds available. And that sending people home, there was a clash of their values, and so people started to experience moral injury. There's a whole range of stuff that happened, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So this is their quote, and I think it's really interesting that they make comment here, and I just want to here we go. Yes. One of the things I always say, please feel free to make a comment or ask a question relevant to the topic we are exploring, whether it's a few words or either on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook. If anybody is on it, there's a particular individual who I really miss because she used to ask loads of questions, and they're quite deep questions as well. And it's the questions that I really enjoy, the engagement with people. They're not talking, but the engagement really kind of keeps me on my toes. So this is what Canopy say. Are you suffering with a sense of guilt, shame, remorse, or regret after witnessing, perpetrating, or learning about an event which goes against your beliefs? Does this leave you reconsidering your career, for example, changing your role, reducing your hours, leaving your workplace, or even your profession? You may be experiencing moral injury. I'm going to read that again. Are you suffering with a sense of guilt, shame, or remorse, or regret after witnessing, perpetrating, or learning about an event which goes against your beliefs? Does this leave you reconsidering your career, for example, changing your role, reducing your working hours, leaving your workplace, or even your profession? You may be experiencing moral injury. This whole thing about perpetrating, I recall meeting somebody not too long ago, and he told me about the place. When I explained to him, he'd never heard the term before, but when I explained to him, he said, that's been happening in my workplace. And he was in finance, and they'd asked him to do some stuff with the books and the budget, and he didn't, and he quietly left the organization because they were asking him to do things which he knew clearly was wrong. So if you've loved your job, and now after witnessing something unpleasant at work, where little, if anything is done to resolve it, you want to leave as quickly as possible, you may be indeed experiencing moral injury. This is very different, of course, if you get to, you're working at a particular place and you come to kind of the end, you've mastered the work, and intuitively there's a kind of sense that, look, I really need to change now, change career, go into a different direction. That is very, very different. That's a kind of inner unction, an inner impulse, as opposed to witnessing something that is professional and unethical. So it's a point that I've said repeatedly, that moral injury really disrupts our inner world. It's a bit like I said to somebody some time ago, nobody gets a touch of flu. You either have flu or you don't. Nobody has a touch of moral injury. You either experience it or you don't. So moral injury, it really disrupts who we are as individuals. And those of you who have experienced it, and certainly individuals who've spoken to me, the length of time it's taken them to get back into work, and I don't mean a few weeks or a few months. For some people, after 2 or 3 years, just finding the courage and the strength, the psychological well-being, the emotional well-being to re-enter the workplace after such a traumatic experience. And if you read enough about moral injury, it was Jonathan Shea, the psychiatrist, who was working with the soldiers who returned from the Vietnam War, who said it was the moral injury that caused soldiers to take their own lives, not the PTSD or losing their friends and the horrors of war, but it was this clash, this violation of values and morals while they were in the war. So it wouldn't surprise me also some of the statistics we hear about British soldiers returning from war and how disenfranchised they can be, various addictions and depression and so forth. It wouldn't surprise me if some of that is to moral injury, not so much to do with war, but maybe some of the treatment they received on returning home and so forth. One of the things I wanted to just pick up on is that some, of course, moral injury can lead people to suicidal ideation and some people completing suicide. And I just wanted to pick up on something here in Britain. Suicide was a criminal act. Hence, it's still in our language, the person commits suicide. But suicide was decriminalized in 1961, but there's still an overhang in our language. So now people either say that they've ended their life, they've completed suicide, they've killed themselves, but we try not to use the word commit suicide. I think I still have to catch myself sometimes because it's there in the language, because at one time it was a criminal act. Those of you who know anything about British history, that if you attempted to take your own life and you failed, they would take you into the dock and try you. If you took your own life and you completed it, your family then were brought to court, property was confiscated, a whole range of stuff. You weren't buried in sacred ground and all that type of thing. And somebody I know told me of an individual who went to a particular church for well over 20 odd years, and their son took his own life. And when they went to the minister to ask if he'd do the service, he refused to do it. And consequently, the person has never gone back to that church again. So suicide was decriminalized in England in 1961. So some of the stresses that you're feeling in your workplace is nothing to do with your workload, but it's what you're seeing and witnessing, and nobody seems to be batting an eyelid. You see people, colleagues suffering, it's reported to management and nothing is being done. And what happens, that leads to a lack of trust in the organization. But I want us to consider this. I think moral injury is a health and safety issue. Health and safety, quite often we consider, has to do with machinery, electrical stuff, lighting, water, and all that type of thing, and people working in stressful conditions. But I'm of the opinion that moral injury is a health and safety issue, which leaves people feeling unsafe, the consequences of which are dangerous. Now, I spoke to a friend of mine. He's got his own business in health and safety, and I just ran this idea by him, and he said, Delroy, yep, that is a health and safety issue, and we're going to have a conversation. And I've asked him whether or not he'll come on the program, and we'll have a kind of conversation around moral injury and being a health and safety issue. So he's on holiday at the moment. When he comes back, we'll see whether he's up for it. I'll make sure it's advertised, you'll know about it. But I really do think that moral injury is a health and safety issue. And I wish that companies, the amount of money they spent in complying to health and safety government legislation, I wish many companies made that same effort and energy in ensuring the well-being and so forth of their staff. Moral injury begin when we begin to feel emotionally, existentially, and psychologically unsafe at work. As I said before, I believe it's a health and safety issue. There's enough evidence from the world of psychology informing us that employees feeling unsafe in their workplaces can lead to anxiety and a range of other mental health issues. You can imagine if you're working in an environment 8 or 9 hours a day, you're feeling unsafe, watching your back, not too sure what's happening, you're on tenterhooks all the time, that's going to have massive implications on your levels of anxiety and other forms of your well-being. What we must not forget is that when we feel unsafe, it is both an external and internal event. There is an invisible physiological, as I mentioned already, physiological and hormonal response happening within our bodies when we are feeling unsafe. For example, when we're under stress, there's consistently high levels of cortisol and adrenaline running in our system. Both hormones are designed for short bursts of time, but if you're in a constant state of stress and anxiety, it causes problems and can lead to major ill health as well. So what can we do? Well, one of the things, of course, you can inform your supervisor, HR and management, but what has been seen, and I am convinced there are some brilliant managers, brilliant supervisors, brilliant HR, brilliant leaders who, when they hear the criticism, they hear of things not being done correctly, they have the courage to admit it and do something about it. One of the things I understood as a leader was this: what you didn't deal with today, and you sweep under the carpet, believe you me, it come back to bite you on your bum seriously hard months later. And if there's a meeting and you're asked the question, did you know about this? As it happened to me in my early days, did you know about this? Yes, I did. Why didn't you tell us? And you don't have to have too many of those lessons to learn that when things go wrong as a leader, you bring it to the people. Don't dodge it. Don't sweep it under the carpet. Don't deny it, but deal with it. Because what happens, you then create trust in the workforce and your organization improves. One of the things I've said to individuals, what a lot of leaders don't realize, when somebody makes, if there's a complaint or they're raising an issue, ultimately, if you deal with it, it's improving the workforce, it's improving the condition. But what we do quite often, we deal with it as a threat, and then we get under cover, and then we can become kind of defensive aggressive, get quite nasty, and the person who's raised the issue, we then do our utmost to kind of get rid of them. So some of the self-help strategies are supervision, supervisor, management, or HR. Or within the UK, we have ACAS, where it's a government-funded independent body where you can go and make complaints. It can be done anonymously. Also, remember, you're not alone, and there may be other people in the workforce experiencing the same thing as you. Could you reach out to somebody? That's one. And maybe in the workplace, or maybe outside the workplace, you form a support group because you're seeing what's taking place. You don't really want to leave the organization, but you see what's taking place. Can a support group be created? I recall, now it's not even in my notes. I recall years ago, an organization I worked for, there was a particular individual who's not been treated too nicely by the manager. And I kind of sensed something was going on. And we had a meeting, and we had a meeting, not with the manager, but with this person who was feeling really attacked by the manager. We couldn't do anything about the manager, but what we did, we ensured that the person was well supported by us, and they remained in the organization for quite some time after that, because there was kind of checking points that she knew that we were supporting her, and so forth. We didn't do anything with the manager. We're not able to do that, but we gave her as much support as we could do. Is that something you could do within the workplace with a group of you? Keep a journal, document everything. You don't need to tell anybody what you're doing. And one of the thoughts, those of you will know, I do a thought for each day. And there's an individual, I shan't say where, but a very good friend of mine, part of a charity, promised funding over a considerable amount of time, was told that people would get back to her. They never got back to her. And what she did, she kept a journal. All phone calls she spoke to, when they said they were going to call and they didn't. Anyway, time for a big meeting with the funders. They were absolutely shocked when she pulled out of her bag a folder. I was told it was seriously thick of all the things that had been promised and all the rest of it. They were absolutely embarrassed. So that's something you can do, and something you can do. Keep a journal, log what goes on. And if you decide to leave the organization, so you're not being pushed, you decide to leave and you have an exit interview, it's the time to bring these issues up. There's a friend of mine, he's now in his 80s, but now many years ago, he did a course, and he was deeply unhappy with how the course had been structured, and lots of complaints on the course. And he said, Delroy, once I finished, I went to the course director with a list of complaints, how unsatisfactory the course was. So there's lots we can do. There's lots we can do in terms of, it might not even change things, but it's what you want to do. You want to be able to express some of the things that you've seen. So at least even if they don't do anything about it, in one sense, you've cleared your chest and you've emptied yourself of some of the stuff you've been carrying. And of course, if it's an exit interview, you're leaving and you won't be returning to the organization. But it's almost as though you have a duty to those people left behind. If there's some consciousness and courage within management, they might do something about what they hear. Develop a self-care plan. That's really important. In many instances, as I've listened to individuals and some of the horrors that they've gone through, I realize that a long soothing bath and mindfulness, as good as they are, and getting a good diet, as good as they are, is not enough to deal with the situation at hand. Something more robust is needed. Somebody to talk to, or having developing work boundaries. There's certain things you will do, there's certain things you won't do, in the sense of kind of looking after yourself as best you can. There's a quote written by an African-American feminist, Audre Lorde. She was a professor, a writer, and she was a poet. And she wrote this about being black, female, lesbian, so forth in America. But I've used it. This is her quote: "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare." Basically, she was saying, if you're in a place which is out to get you, self-care is not a luxury, it's not self-indulgent, it's about preservation. If you're working in a place and you've sussed out they're out to get you, self-care can't be just a nice soft bath. People are out to get you. You're working in an environment that is becoming oppressive, anxiety laden, and all that type of thing. You have to do something to preserve yourself. Listen, your mental well-being, if that goes off center, it can take weeks and months to recover. So do all that you can. It might be that you'd love to leave, you can't leave today. And I would suggest to you, before you get to the crisis, and I remember working with somebody quite some time ago, she would love to leave, but she said, "Delroy, I can't leave now." But I said, "Could you leave in a year's time?" "Yes, I can." "Well, can we then sit together, and how are we going to manage the next year?" And it could be that you can't leave today. And I would suggest to you, if you've got a group of people who you trust, you want to leave, but it's got to be strategic. Or if you don't want to get your family or your friends involved, go and see a therapist. One of the things I've said to individuals, counselors, therapists, whatever you want to call them, they are brilliant for giving strategies for coping before a crisis comes. So I said to individuals, you go and see a therapist to prevent some stuff, 4 or 5 sessions. That's it. That is far cheaper, and there's less energy if you have 5 sessions. If you wait till you're in a crisis, you're in a mess, 4 sessions is a lot cheaper than 1 year or 2 years. So counselors are brilliant in giving strategies how you can cope and manage during difficult times. So just think about it. One of the things you may want to learn about is, as I call it, learn about moral conflict. Moral conflict is when you're faced with 2 difficult situations and you can't meet both at once. So it could be you see a situation happening in your work, but then you've got to look after your own job as well. There's 2 situations and you can't do both at the same time. You're looking after yourself, but you know that matter needs to be addressed. I would encourage you to learn about moral conflict and how can you manage it. And you might say to me, "Delroy, look, life is busy enough as it is. I've got enough on my plate." But this is what I'll say to you. Sometimes in our lives, we see things which disturbs us so much that our lives take a different turn. It sees things differently, and we pursue a different calling, so to speak. Those of you know about the Samaritans in the UK and different parts of the world. I don't know if you know the story. Chad Vara was a curate, and he did the funeral service of a 12 or 13-year-old girl whose period had started, and she thought something catastrophic had happened to her, and she took her own life. And the story goes, as the coffin was being lowered into the ground, he made a covenant with God, with himself, that he would teach young people about sex education, and no other young person would take their own life in that matter. And that's how the Samaritans started. You know, the place where you can phone in, and some places now you can actually go in and talk to people. So sometimes some of the things that we can see can shift our lives in a direction that gives us meaning, purpose, direction, focus, which we never started, or we never had that to start to begin with. Concluding thoughts. The quicker you stop the signs, so you see the signs, understand the signs of moral injury impacting on you, and more promptly that you deal with it, the better for you. Remember, when you are unwell from the effects of moral injury, if you're still employed by the organization, as I said, you may get a bunch. If you're on the long-term sick, you may get a bunch of flowers. You may get a hamper if you're lucky. There'll be nobody coming to cook you a pot of chicken soup for recovery. I would really encourage you that if you sense that anything I've said, you sense, you know what, Del, this might be moral injury. If you go onto my LinkedIn site, I've just got loads of material. It's free. There's other organizations looking at this thing about moral injury. Look at the stuff, read it. And if you think that you may be experiencing it in your workplace, you're seeing things, you're witnessing things that's clashing against your values, you've been asked to do things you know clearly is wrong, and there's pressure on you to conform, that is certainly moral injury. Look and see the ways in which you can manage yourself if you haven't got the option of leaving the workplace at the moment. I'll just finish with this. Taking measures to look after yourself is your number one priority, no one else's. Okay, so wish you well. So tonight we looked at moral injury. We looked at a little bit of the definition. We looked at, could it be happening to you, some of the signs and symptoms. And then we looked at some of the things that we can do we can't stop it, but how can we protect ourselves? Because sometimes we can't control what's out there, but we can control how we respond to certain things. So wish you well. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night and the rest of your week. And please, if you're on LinkedIn, you'll see my daily input of thoughts. And then there'll be a newsletter. And then I'll see you next Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock. If you feel this is helpful, please feel to share with individuals. More than happy for you to do that. That's the idea. Help as many people as we can so that we can look after ourselves as best as we can. And if we can avoid a crisis, manage ourselves to move ourselves out of situation before things get worse, well, for me, you've made my day. Wish you well. Speak to you soon. All the best. And Facebook, I have no idea what's happening to you. Anyway, you take care. Wish you well. Bye-bye.